Category 5 Hurricane Katrina is barreling towards New Orleans. There are mandatory evacuations that have been ordered all up and down the Gulf Coast. Thousands of people, tens of thousands, are evacuating, jamming up the interstates.
We're expecting storm surge of 20 to 30 feet high. And some of those levees, the highest levee, may be 18 to 20 feet. So you have that storm surge, that wall of water on top of the tide moving into the coastline and moving across that levee, and it acts like a slide with all of that water going in. So obviously this is the worst case scenario. This is the worst storm to hit the worst possible location.
It was 20 years ago today. Fox News' coverage, including senior meteorologist Janice Dean, talking about Katrina's soon landfall. All week we've been highlighting Katrina, which is still one of the costliest hurricanes in United States history. 20 years ago, Katrina strengthening. You heard from Janice Dean there, heading straight for the north central Gulf Coast.
And by the morning of August 29, 2005, Katrina made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane. And with hours of that landfall, the worst case scenario unfolds in New Orleans. A levee break that sends water pouring into the Crescent City, trapping tens of thousands of people on the rooftops of their homes.
Devastating, and we remember it today. Fox Weather Hurricane Specialist Bryan Norcross joining us in studio this morning. Bryan, good to see you. You were tracking Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago today. I'm sure you remember that day-by-day progress. But as we look back, and I know you've talked about it a bit this week, where were you at the time, and do you remember when Katrina reached that Cat 5?
Yeah, absolutely. I was the CBS News hurricane analyst, so I was looking at it from a national perspective as well as being chief meteorologist in Miami. And when it hit Category 5, and we had been concerned leading up to that because a storm was going to the Gulf Coast, and we all knew how vulnerable the New Orleans area was, not necessarily the city, because the city was protected with flood walls, but the metropolitan area and southern Mississippi had been hit by Camille and demolished by Camille in 1969. So we knew how vulnerable the area was there. And then to have the storm blow up to a Category 5 on top of the vulnerability that we had already been talking about, you know, it was frightening beyond words. A meteorologist in Slidell, it's the National Weather Service office for New Orleans, wrote this epic warning that the neighborhoods are going to be unlivable for a long period of time and so forth. But his warning was for the wind. It wasn't for the storm surge, right? He made history with this warning that the Tampa folks had actually put together at one time. But he really was worried about a Category 5 coming and demolishing everything, because the New Orleans metropolitan area is not built for wind. It's well inland, right? And if you think about the images you saw, you didn't see shingles ripped off of roofs. You saw people on roofs, right? So it turned out not to be a windstorm in the end, but it turned out to be catastrophic from the water.
Yeah, the 20-foot surge, the levee break. And, you know, and I think it's interesting, too, because at the time it had strengthened to a Category 5. It weakened. And I do think, and you would probably know better, to see the weakening in strength, perhaps people then thinking, oh, well, maybe it won't be as bad. And I know thousands did try to leave ahead of Katrina, but I think imagining that was certainly not something people suspected.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know, because when it reached Category 5, the city of New Orleans finally issued a mandatory evacuation. And it was the most successful evacuation ever. Right? Now, some folks, because they didn't have the buses working, and the buses were in a place to get flooded, and there were other issues, and people that didn't have their own transportation and so forth, they were stuck, or they just didn't believe what the government was saying, right? You know, they live on the edge anyway, and they stay away from instructions coming from downtown. So, you know, there were multiple things, but that category, the fact that it peaked up to Category 5, anybody that had the means was on the road and getting out of town, and it turned out to be very successful in a statistical sense.
Yeah, and to that point, the Slidell office, as they reflect on 20 years, they had mentioned that this was the largest displacements of a population since the Great Depression. Yes, you had evacuations, but you also had people who were unable to get back to home in New Orleans. I worked along the Gulf Coast in Houston. I met several Katrina survivors. Then they had to weather Hurricane Harvey in 2017. You were there, we were talking in April at the National Hurricane Conference. The multi-billion-dollar flood protection projects that went on and that have gone on since, we don't have much time, but there are walls quite literally there now to protect them against a 20 to 25-foot storm surge, which was not there before Katrina.
Well, they had flood walls, but the problem is we learned in Katrina that they weren't built properly, right? So if the flood walls had held that were built after Hurricane Betsy in 1965, actually that's what prompted that system, if they had held,
Before Camille.
it would have been a tremendously different outcome because the water would have come over the walls. But then as soon as the water went down, the storm surge went down, it would have stopped coming over. When the flood walls failed, the water came over and then it kept coming over until it was the level of the Gulf or the lake. And that was the difference. So these new flood walls, they're not coming down. So yes, water can come over them into the bowl, but the pumps can take care of that. And as soon as the water goes down outside the walls, then it stops coming in. So it's a much more robust system.
Yeah. It is, $14 billion was the number I saw in order to rebuild all of that. But the hopes that it saves money down the road should anything as catastrophic approach the Louisiana coast. And also beyond the levees, the barrier islands, the wetlands have been restored. So there's been a lot of effort to shield Louisiana from
that's still
another.
going on. The Chandelier Islands, they're just getting to actually trying to resurrect those. Those are the islands kind of south of Mississippi, east of southeastern Louisiana. And there's a lot of work to do in southern Louisiana to try and put land back where water has taken over.
It's still, and we were talking about it too, it's still evident though, some folks never returning to New Orleans, and you can still see the impacts from.
Oh yeah, I mean, in those neighborhoods, in the 9th Ward, in Gentilly, the northern Lakeview, the places on the north side up by the lake, I mean, many of those neighborhoods still have homes that flooded. People had to move out. Now they have been sitting there for 20 years, and nobody's in them. That are just all mold and so forth inside. So they'd have to be torn down. Yeah, they're sitting there today. It's an amazing thing.
The scarred ground, the scarred infrastructure, and a lot of people that lived through it, the trauma that has resurfaced, and it's,
State, we have one more question for you. It's not about Katrina. We do want to push to that programming note for later this evening, because all week we've been highlighting Hurricane Katrina as we continue to look back on its lasting impacts along the Gulf Coast. Tonight at 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, the fourth and final part of our docuseries, Katrina's Wrath, 20 Years Later, will air. Tonight's episode focuses on resilience and how residents as well as leaders in New Orleans are prepared for these future storms. And as we talk about Katrina's landfall,